So first and foremost, we're going to have a session from a man who, in many ways, is probably one of the smartest people in the world. At least I hope he is, because he really needs to be. Would you give a warm welcome, please, to Royce Curtin, who's the Managing Director for Global Intelligence for Barclays Bank. Royce.
Good afternoon. Thank you for that very warm and inaccurate introduction. So Royce Curtin, Barclays Bank, thanks very much for the opportunity to share a little bit with you today about cybersecurity and kind of the state that we all face regardless of the institution or the sector that you work in. So what are we going to talk about very quickly, and I'm going to apologize in advance because I know we're behind schedule, so I'm going to move very quickly through the material and hopefully we'll address all your questions in the panel that follows afterwards. So there's a lot of numbers floating around out there. We're going to talk a little bit about what they mean, or what some of them mean, who the bad guys are, what they're doing to us, how they're doing it to us. Is there an impact to what they do to us? How do we respond to what they do to us? And then what we're doing about it, what we should be doing about it, and then when do we go to our board or our C-suite and say, hey, we have a robust cybersecurity defense that's in place, intact, and impenetrable, and we'll answer those questions in the end. So everybody's pretty familiar with what's been going on globally. In the last couple of months, 2 global ransomware attacks impacting 100+ countries, hundreds of thousands of institutions. Biggest cyber heist or theft in history last year, 81 million euros. Biggest DDoS attack, shut down internet on the East Coast for several hours. Espionage or misinformation campaigns in the French and American elections. Biggest data breach ever last year, 1 billion users, and we already talked about the DDoS attack. This will continue to happen. These are all firsts that happened last year, and as you already have heard from Equifax breach 143 million records, Deloitte breach 5 million records, these types of firsts are going to be recurring because the threat is global, dynamic, and ever-changing. And by 2020, and you think, hey, that's 2020, that's 2 years from now. Okay, so that's right around the corner. 50 times greater data on the internet, 100 times more users, internet traffic. Internet of Things devices, there'll be 22 billion of those connected, which is a 300% increase from right now. There'll be 1 billion more people online, and this is important. 75% of global information technology infrastructure that we depend on to run our businesses, organizations, public and private sector will be controlled by third parties, and we'll talk about the importance of that in just a minute. Why does this matter? All of those numbers, every single one of those numbers is another way that the bad guys can attack us. They are attack vectors of how they can compromise our networks, shut down our services, and attack our data for our customers and clients. Hold our systems and services ransom for hostage, disrupt the services that we provide our customers and clients, and socially engineer our customers to commit massive and prolific fraud. Question for you. What do you believe is the single biggest threat to your business? And it doesn't matter what sector you come from. These are some possible answers. Is it a terrorist attack on your physical facilities? Is it a physical assault on your employees as they traverse back and forth to work? Is it an attack on your business travelers as they move around globally overseas to conduct business on your behalf? Is it a major data breach? A lot of people would think that that absolutely is something that can really damage your business, and it can. Or is it a major service disruption that's going to impact not only what you deliver to your services or your customers and clients, but also reputation to your brand, and can you sustain those types of attacks? I would submit to you that the biggest threat to whatever organization or institution you come from is a loss in trust in your ability to deliver those world-class services, the innovation that people expect, and to do so securely. And that's a constant challenge for us to balance customer experience with security. So who are the bad guys? These are not surprises to any of you. They're nation states, they're top-tier cyber crime teams, they're hacktivists, they're insiders. They are individuals that successfully weaponize some of the most dangerous intelligence tools that are previously used by agencies in the US, like the CIA and NSA, where those tools that are used for good are subsequently compromised, stolen, released into the wild, and then weaponized and used by the bad guys. And then the last thing there, the criminal underground, CAAS, is crime as a service. It's basically a buffet of tools. It's where the bad guys operate in the dark web on encrypted channels anonymously, and they do the worst heinous things that you can, and they buy the services that they need. You no longer have to be a ones and zeros guy or lady that is an expert in attacking networks and building malware and conducting DDoS attacks. You can go into the underground anonymously, talk encrypted with bad guys, and buy what you need to attack any organization or institution around the world. So what are they doing to us? We talked about this already a little bit. They're stealing our data, they're manipulating our data, they're destroying our data with the worst types of malware like Shamoon and others that literally will penetrate a network and shut down and destroy your endpoint devices in your infrastructure. They'll attack your payment platform systems if you're a financial institution like us and others. That's something that we're really, really worried about. And we'll talk about how much money you can lose in one singular fraudulent transaction. Compromising our trading platforms. We talked about destruction of data, massive fraud and misinformation, using fake information to have real-world impact on organizations and institutions. How are they doing it? Everybody's pretty familiar with social engineering, phishing, bad emails. Emails that look legitimate from bad guys. Ransomware, you're familiar with that. Smishing, SMS text messages that you use to conduct routine business that are fake. Vishing is old school. That's bad guys using telephones to socially engineer people away from proprietary information and harvest their credentials. BEC, business email compromise or CEO fraud. This is the biggie. This is when bad guys are able to generate fictitious email messages, usually that look legitimate from the CEO or the CFO of an organization, send it to somebody that the bad guys know is responsible for executing large-scale financial transactions because they've derived all this information about the institution and the people that work within it and people's responsibilities and job remit from social media like LinkedIn. Who's on LinkedIn? Everybody. And then that employee, thinking they're executing a transaction on behalf of the boss, will send X millions of dollars, and they're sending it to the bad guy. So that's a really, really significant type of fraud. $5 billion lost last year globally, and that's just what was reported. And I guarantee you that the loss to this type of fraud was exponentially higher, and a lot of it goes unreported due to the damage to brand reputation. Crime as a service, we talked about that. Buffet of tools. You can go into the underground anonymously, encrypted, and buy whatever you need. If you want to conduct a DDoS attack against Barclays, you can tell them what time you want to start, the level of intensity, how many minutes you want it to last. When the institution is focused on the disruption and the DDoS, you can buy malware to deploy onto the network to exfiltrate data, destroy data. You can pay somebody else to steal the data, and you can pay somebody else to launder the funds. And you can do it while you're in your pajamas at home drinking a cup of coffee, and you'll never meet these people. And that's the nature and the aggressive diversity of the threat that we face today. And then the insider threat. Very, very small percentage, massive, massive impact on any organization that those people compromise. Everybody in the world knows Edward Snowden. That's one guy. So insider threat, you have to plan for the worst. Three biggest threats, certainly from a financial institution's perspective. Attacks on our internal payment platform systems. We'll talk about why in a minute. We've talked about social engineering, and we've talked about all the different things that they can do to data, to include your intellectual property and data that's retained in third parties, which we'll talk about in just a minute too, briefly. Attacks on internal payment platform systems. Biggest theft ever. Last year, $81 million stolen from the Bank of Bangladesh. Why does that matter? It was one fraudulent transaction. It cost the bank $81 million. If it was not for one character mistyped on the fraudulent message, it would have cost $1 billion. They would have lost $1 billion with a B. So one mistake by the bad guys, and they only stole $81 million in that transaction. And this is the first time ever that a nation state was attributed to conducting that theft, which was North Korea. So very powerful state actor, bank robbery through cyberspace. What does this slide say? It says the bad guys learn from success. If you can steal $81 million with the click of a button, everybody else wants to replicate that high-value payoff, and you can see that they continue to move across other payment platform systems. Social engineering attacks, you see the big blue hook. What's that mean? The bottom line is 90+% of all of these horrible attacks that we talk about on the network, they almost always start with one of our beloved employees, us, clicking on a link that looks like a legitimate email. There's an embedded link. It's infected with malware. It deploys an exploit kit. The malware gets onto the network and does all those horrible things that we just talked about. So we, us, our people, our beloved employees, are the weakest link, and we'll talk about how you counter that through training, education, and awareness. We talked about $5 billion loss to business email compromise. This is an example of the real-world impact. Pretty blue line, really ugly directional spike in the downward direction, accompanied by corresponding scary red arrows and bad things happening. This is a company, they lost $40 million in one transaction. Fraudulent email from what the employee thought to be the CFO of the bank, executed send. They lost $40 million with the click of a button. And you can see what happened, 17% drop in share price, CEO and CFO fired. Real world event. Data breaches, more big scary numbers. We talked about Equifax, we talked about Deloitte. Should we be worried about a data breach that happens in another country halfway around the world? Yes, because it's highly likely that your customers and clients, their data are part of those breaches, and that data is pushed into the criminal underground and fuels a thriving criminal underground economy. And all this is fraud. They steal data, they push it into the underground, and they market it and exploit it for money to commit fraud. All those numbers just show you how much data is being stolen, literally up to the second. Of the top 10 biggest data breaches associated with insider threats, 3 of them were insiders. You may or may not be able to see this, but what that says, it's a forum post like you're going to Craigslist, and it basically says, need Barclays insider ASAP, exclamation point. That's the one in blue, and the one on the bottom says, Barclays insider needed for big job, consistent work available, please no time wasters, I have no patience. So if somebody wants to betray Barclays, I guess they need to be really serious. They shouldn't work with this guy because he really wants people that are dedicated to stealing money from the inside. Data breaches, again, another example. LinkedIn, we talked about it, everybody's aware of it. 2012, they lost 6.5 million records were breached, but it took them 4 years to realize that they actually lost 100 million records. And this is going to continue, and Equifax and Deloitte are just other examples of this. The comment at the bottom, it's just a sad, sobering reality that puts things into context for all of us. The bad guys are really, really good at what they do, and they use really, really sophisticated tools, techniques, procedures, and methods of operation to steal our money and affect and impact our customers and clients. This slide basically covers what we already talked about, a bunch of blue circles and arrows. Data breaches fuel the criminal underground and result in billions of dollars in losses and fraud a year, over $100 billion lost a year to fraud. Suppliers. Third party, we talked about this, 75% of our global information technology infrastructure is managed by someone else. So we all are going to rely 75% of the time on another entity to provide our services, maintain our customers' data, and protect our most valuable environments. That's really, really important so we can control our own cybersecurity defenses and networks and provide very robust defenses for our customers, clients, and protect data. But we rely almost exclusively on other people who retain that same data and help us provide those same services. So you have to have very aggressive vetting of these third-party suppliers on a continuous basis because the bad guys attack us at the weakest point. That is a reality. Why should they try and penetrate someone that's spent millions of dollars on protecting their networks when they can attack somebody that hasn't? So very quickly, one example of the types of threat actors that we're dealing with. This is just one Eastern European organized crime group that is sponsored by a nation state. They attacked the French and US elections. Okay, so over here they're attacking national elections. This same group tried to target individuals at a financial institution, researchers who had information on a Ukrainian utility company. So look at the diversity of what the threat actors are targeting. They weren't successful in extracting the information on the utility company that they were going after with this particular group of research that they had researched specifically. They knew these people had access to that information. They weren't successful, but the next year, they did get the information and they took down the entire power grid of a country. Okay, so these are the type of people that you're dealing with. Diverse, same group, very diverse target set. Is your business vulnerable? This just talks about all the different types of attacks happening all around the world. Hong Kong, Malaysia, banks, stockbrokers, security traders, DDoS attacks. The threat is global. It's not compartmentalized, and we'll talk in a minute about why we have to share everything we have against these threats, because if they attack somebody tomorrow, they're going to attack, or if they attack somebody yesterday, they're going to attack us tomorrow. Fourth bullet down, Russian trading platform lost $400 million in 14 minutes with illicit trading. So do you think that had an impact? You bet it did. Really, really sophisticated adversary. Is there an impact to our businesses that are compromised? It doesn't matter what sector. There's a corresponding 2 to 15% drop in share price if an organization is compromised and it's made public. That is just a reality. And banks suffer the biggest declines in share prices and the most regulatory fines. That blue line is going in the wrong direction. Again, is there a corresponding impact of you being compromised? You see the blue line going in the right direction. You see the big ugly spike with the scary red arrows. 25% drop in share price of this particular Austrian aerospace company. Here's what's important about this. This was a real company. It was impacted by a misinformation campaign. A company called ZRI Zatara produced a 101-page report about how this company was mismanaged. The stock that the shareholders held was basically held on worthless paper. That report was publicized in the business internet in the open, and there was a 25% drop in share price. That's what they said about the organization. The reality was it was a fake company, it was a fake report, and it had a real-world 25% impact on share price. So this is a threat, and the intelligence community never attributed who that company was. So that just goes to show you the danger of what one report can do to a company. All right, we're almost done, so hang with me. All the stuff we're talking about, it's bad, it's scary. How do we win? How do we counter the very, very complicated adversary that we face? You've got to hire top talent, and we all are trying to hire the same people. Those cybersecurity experts, those intelligence analytical experts with those big, beautiful minds, those young, vibrant people that help us put together algorithms and analyze all the scary information and sift through the volumes of data. You've got to hire the right people, and you've got to compensate them, right? They're very, very marketable. And you've got to pay for the right technology, and you've got to leverage it, and you have to understand that you're going to have to keep paying. You can't buy it once and be done with it. It's a recurring investment. Resilience. We all have to build resilience into any organization and operation that you're responsible for. You have to have the ability to operate through service disruptions because you will be penetrated, you will be compromised. It's just a reality. You have to have a plan to how do you continue to deliver those services to your customers and clients while you're having to deal with those issues. Building end-to-end security in everything you do. Innovation, which is an expectation of the global client base, and intelligence together equals awesome customer experience. You have to have both. You can't pay the best and brightest to deliver the coolest stuff, slickest stuff for your customers if the bad guys are already talking about how to compromise it in the underground. You've got to work together and know what the bad guys are going after, so when you deliver innovation, it's secure. So you have to do that together. Test, exercise, and validate your controls. The threat is always changing, so the controls that we put in place they can't be static. They have to constantly revalidate what the bad guys are doing, and you have to update your controls and test them on a recurring basis. And you do that to make sure that your gaps are mitigated. Training and awareness, really, really important. Foot stomping this. 90+% of attacks happen because one of our own folks clicks on a link. You've got to train your workforce to not do that. And then you have to do that continuously. We are spending a month of cybersecurity awareness at our institution, an entire month where we bombard our employees with cybersecurity awareness globally. We're in 170 countries. We have 140,000 people. We're spending a month talking to our people about cybersecurity. And we're constantly testing them. If somebody clicks on a link, boom, they're automatically routed to training. And we have an individual from our cybersecurity team, or our outreach team, specifically go and talk to that employee no matter where they're at in the world to make sure it's not punitive. It's just so that we build cybersecurity awareness into the corporate DNA of the company. And that's just a recipe for success. And that's kind of what that last bullet says. And I think this is the last slide. What does it say? So when are you done? When can you go to your C-suite or your board of directors and say, we have a cybersecurity defense posture that's impenetrable? The answer is never. You can't. There's no amount of money that's going to benchmark to where you've robustly protected your network and you're impenetrable. There's no amount of people that you can hire. There's no magic bullet. That's the bottom line. The threats are global, dynamic, and complex, so you have to have a dynamic ability to be agile and protect the network that you're responsible for. Again, constantly testing your networks, and the things that you pay for today are going to be obsolete tomorrow. So innovative, agile, dynamic, and that's all I have. So I think we're going to move to the panel now.
Gary, would you mind giving just a very short introduction to yourself?
Yeah, okay, thank you. My name's Gary Peace. I've got my own cybersecurity consultancy focused around insider threat management. My background up until 4 years ago when I set up the business was as a police officer in the Met Police as a detective for 18 years. For the last 8 years of my service, I was involved in professional standards and anti-corruption. So we targeted corrupt police officers and those who corrupt the police, so the organised crime outside. So after a stint of doing all the kind of sexy work with long lenses and following people around and bugging offices and cars and so on and so forth, I moved into the world of high-tech crime. Met Police Professional Standards Department is a force within a force. We have every conceivable department that any other police force would have. I moved into high-tech crime, so we were the ones who did the kind of the CSI stuff, so seizing the computers, the mobile phones, all that kind of stuff, and analysing them for evidence to prove or disprove an allegation of crime against one of those police officers. My particular role was internal network investigations. So I was responsible for all investigations concerning misuse of the corporate network and any information leakage from it. So things like phone hacking with Rebecca Brooks, Plebgate with Andrew Mitchell, Jean-Charles Menezes, the guy who was shot on the Stockwell tube station. I directly investigated the digital data behind that.
That's great, Gary. Thank you very much. I know you could talk forever, and he's a really experienced guy. So please do catch Gary after the event and talk through a little bit more. Anne.
I'm Anne Duncan. I'm here as the IoD France representative, and I head the Digital and Technology Leadership Program for the IoD France. And I also have other administrative roles where I'm working with IoT and different kinds of new technologies coming in. I would say I'm the outlier on the panel because my background is not like all of these eminent gentlemen who have incredible backgrounds in crime, cybersecurity, etc., or technology. I actually come to it from the side of being a director of companies or being an administrator on boards, and what kinds of questions and issues boards really need to be thinking about. And one of the things that I think we've all found is that we can very quickly get down into very detailed information, and yet maybe what we need is sometimes the helicopter view, but other times we need to get a bit of the detail, or we're not actually able to understand what everyone's talking to us about. So this is one of the things we try to do with our program is to try to build a little bit more information so that you get the absorptive capacity you need in order to make the right decisions and ask the right questions.
Moving right along.
Yep, so my name's Oliver Gower. I'm the Deputy Director for Cyber at the National Crime Agency. So the National Cybercrime Unit within the NCA leads the response to the most serious cybercrime hitting the country. I was also the Gold Commander on for police in response to the WannaCry ransomware attack that hit the NHS earlier this year.
Andy.
I'm Sandy Forrest, the former Chief Police Officer and Public Sector Chief Executive. I now work for ATOS, a global IT company, and I coordinate the various strands of what makes up what people call cybersecurity, because it ain't just an entity. There's bits of consulting, there's bits of product, there's bits of services. So my job is to make that all knit together as an end-to-end, as you mentioned, the end-to-end service. So I say that we provide secure IT services, not IT security services. And that's the difference, is weaving the security into all aspects of service delivery.
That's great. Okay, most of you have heard from me already today, so I'm going to keep my introduction really brief. I'm the CEO of Fifth Step. We're an organisation that bring together organisations and ensure that their information security and cyber security is all aligned. And we do GDPR and all the things I was talking about earlier on. So let's move on to some questions. So Royce, you raised some really thought-provoking aspects in there, but particularly around the enterprise approach. But I think there's many organisations, many people sitting in the audience today who are still concentrating and trying to convince their board that this is a fiduciary duty that they need to take notice of. So, what one thing would you advise that those people facing that kind of situation in the audience? What one thing would you suggest they say to their boards and their C-suites to make sure that they're taking this seriously?
I'd say turn on the news, right? I'd say this is in our face. It's a global threat. It faces us every day. It's indiscriminate. It doesn't matter what industry, what sector, who it targets. It's the same threat actors using the same types of tools, and they're attacking all different types of targets. So you have to find your way to push into the C-suites and educate them and get in front of them and make sure that they understand the nature, the complexity of the threat, and the resourcing that's required to address the threat.
Great answer, thank you. Gary?
I think for me, we've got to get rid of this term cyber. It brings up the wrong connotations. Everyone thinks it's men in dark rooms with huge matrix-like computer screens in front of them, all that kind of stuff. It's rubbish. It is crime. I think, as we've said before, it's just theft, it's fraud, and it's criminal damage. We need to do away with that, and we need to call it a business risk and not a cyber risk.
Yep, very good point. And this really falls into the kind of conversations you're having on a regular basis with boards, right?
I agree. I think that one of the things, I know one of the big companies that participated in our last session that we had in a couple months ago, they were an international oil and energy company, and they've spent about 30% of their time of the board's time when they've been together, just getting educated on the subject. And one of the things that came out of that is to put yourself in an ecosystem, to make sure that your ecosystem, that you're actually driving the ecosystem and not the other way around, so that you've got people like this who are in having the conversations, not just with the board and the C-suite, but with different parts of the organization. Because sometimes I think you can come along and you'll have a better ability to make an impact than someone lower down in the organization who's making the same argument, quite frankly, but coming from a different perspective, it somehow seems to get the attention. The other thing that we heard is that they are actually ready to invest. I think I've read, at least in France, it's something like the latest statistic I saw was something like 82% of the organizations surveyed, I think it was MEDEF, that they said they all want to invest, but they didn't know where, with who, how, so they don't actually have enough information to make a decision, or the right information. They're sort of getting trial balloons posted everywhere, and it's not coherent enough to really make an investment decision. So I think this is where maybe the industry itself, who are working as consultants or others, can put together a plan that actually meets the test of an investment decision at the level of the board or certainly the C-suite.
I think looking back at incidents that have been in the news over the course of the past year, drawing their attention to those, but also the comparison between companies who have been prepared and how they've been able to manage the impact when it's hit versus companies who've clearly not been prepared, and emphasising that you cannot resolve these issues in the heat of battle, that cyber and an attack will move so quickly that if you haven't agreed beforehand the policies at board level and the way you're going to respond, when it happens, which it definitely will, it's too late. And then the harm is so much more because you can't manage the messaging, you can't manage the fallout, particularly around reputational damage that comes from not having an agreed process, a prepared process in place before this happens.
My point of view, it's 3 words: make defensible decisions. When you have been done over, and as Royce says, you probably will be at some stage, how are you going to defend the position? That requires you to have an audit trail and a rational decision-making process. But as soon as you embark on that I'm going to make defensible decisions, that forces you in, as you said, to how are you going to protect, defend, react, recover. So how are you going to plan your recovery before you get sick? So actually just the 3 words of make defensible decisions brings with it a process, an audit trail that takes you right back to what data your providers or your company is collecting at log level way down at the bottom of the pyramid. So the things you need to do is make a decision at the top that makes sense, and you need data to allow that to happen, and a lot of that comes from down in the system and down in the weeds. But if you embark on make defensible decisions, you will find that the rest of the process has to follow to justify those decisions. It's like terrorism. You're unlikely to stop it happening. You'll be judged on how hard you tried, how well you prepared, how quickly you recovered, and how able you were to constrain the damage to as small an area as possible.
That's great. So some real actionable points there, I think you'll agree. So make sure you've got a plan. Those who have a plan recover more quickly, and they tend to be better respected and better regarded and have less of a reputational damage from such an attack. So really take away those points and some really important aspects there from everyone. Thank you. Let's talk about cybersecurity insurance, because there's a lot, particularly when I'm in the US, talking to customers. There's a far greater penetration in the US for cybersecurity insurance. What's the panel's view? Because within Europe, it's still running at relatively low levels, depending on which numbers you believe. It's circa 25 to 40%, depending on which numbers you believe. Whereas in some parts of the United States, it's as high as 80%. So, Sandy, let's start with yourself this time.
Yeah, it's claims history. The insurance business cannot operate without claims history. Other than that, they'll charge you £1 million to protect you for £1 million. So how do they get the claims history? Well, there's a slightly more advanced market in America. When you look at in this country, the constraints that would be put on a company to get the premiums down to an acceptable level would be brilliant in terms of increasing their cyber protection. Because it's like, car insurance. Well, you know, have you got an MOT? Because that's, without an MOT, you ain't going to get insurance. So that's the sort of things that are creating this marketplace. It's very difficult. One of my friends is in the cyber insurance business, and he finds it very difficult finding affordable cyber insurance because companies either don't have the claims history in the marketplace, or the expense of bringing them up to a standard that would allow them to be insured is prohibitive for them.
Oliver.
Yeah, so I think this is one of the big challenges. Behavioural change and driving behavioural change is a big challenge for the UK government as well, about how you get the public and businesses to adapt their behaviour. Insurance, I think, has got to be one of those levers, but I think it's important that businesses look at what's right for them, what's the right balance between investing in better protection versus money spent on insurance, and with that, the extent to which you insure yourself, just for the money you've lost, but also could it be to get your services back up and running? Should it cover the impact on your customers? You know, there's a decision there about the extent to which you want to insure yourself.
Yeah, I would say that I would agree with those. I think we're at a maturation of this industry. It's not yet there. One of you who's here, I think today, we had recently spoken because inside the IoD there are actually some people who are working on this who know quite well, the Independent Insurers Group. I would suggest among the ecosystems, if I could go back to that, IoD is a terrific one. This is a great conference. Everybody who's been here has had something to say, and I guarantee everybody who's out there would have something to contribute too if we could access that knowledge. So I think that this is a great network for us to actually have influence on this industry and how it evolves, but also the other way around, we can work in it. And one point I would just add, and this comes more from the shared services and global business services industries, one of the things that we've tried to do with back office operations, et cetera, is to streamline, put processes in place, automate, take out human error, because I get a little frustrated when we say, oh, well, 80% of the cybersecurity problems come down to human error or things like this. I mean, I believe that's a false argument, because the reality is that humans are humans, will always be there. We can train them to do better, and we can start measuring, you know, what are the metrics around performance in that. But let's also automate at the same time and find ways that we can take some things out. When I say automate, I mean improve and streamline the processes, take some things out. There are lots of things we're doing. We don't need to have the data transferring between different places. And those kinds of process renewal and re-engineering should be part of the thinking about cybersecurity, I think. And that will help us with our insurance premiums as well, because we'll be able to demonstrate that we've actually done some things to take that error potential out of the system.
Okay. Gary.
I work with a number of insurance agents and brokers, and they will admit to you that they're well behind the curve. They're playing catch up just as everybody else is, especially with the advent of GDPR. But I do also think it's actually a really important thing to do. We all have buildings and fire insurance, and we all have public indemnity insurance. You're going to have to start looking at cyber. It's going to be one of those things that you take off the shelf, along with all the other tools, to mitigate the risk. One of the biggest expenses of when a breach happens is clearing up mess afterwards. It's bringing in people like me to investigate that data breach, or it's looking at your reputational damage limitation. That's where lots and lots of this expense comes in, and that's where I think that when the insurance industry catch up, it's going to be a really important thing to use to mitigate those risks.
Royce.
So I agree with Gary 100%. Unequivocal yes to investing in cybersecurity insurance as part of your cybersecurity defense posture or position for your organization or institution. It engenders trust. It demonstrates that you take the threat seriously. It demonstrates to your customers and your clients that you're willing to invest that to counterbalance the cost post-incident of how do you monetize how much it's going to cost you to remediate the damage on your network. How do you compensate for how much you're going to have to, a drop in share price, if you haven't provided insurance or prepared a robust defense in depth? So I think it's absolutely critical as part of your overall cybersecurity plan to demonstrate that you take the threat seriously.
Fantastic, guys. Well, look, we have been asked to keep this panel discussion a little bit shorter than we'd originally planned. Are you guys all going to be staying around for another 30 minutes or so if people have questions? Is that okay? Yeah. So we won't take any questions now. We'll move on to the next session and hand it back to Jeremy if that's okay. But thank you very much, everyone, for your attention and for answering the questions so succinctly and so clearly and giving what I hope has been some real actionable advice to the audience. Thanks, Jeremy.